How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
Did you see that girl's boobs in the movie?
I didn't.
Did you see it?
I got the made-for-TV version.
Oh.
It's just cartoon bikinis drawn on it the whole time. Can you imagine being the person who had to like try to put together TV edit of this movie? They're just like, what? There's no. The first half of the movie's gone, guys. I don't know what else to do.
They'd come in and be like, did you get that editing done? Yeah, I did. But hey, here's the thing. It's 10 minutes long. So
is that with the credits?
I had to cut out the entire first half an hour and the finale.
Yeah, this is, I don't
The finale of this movie is literally a double penetration.
Oh, God. Well, welcome to Cinema Shock. Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. This is a podcast dedicated to exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. I am one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
Hey, I'm co-host Justin Bishop. Joining us today, as always, is double penetration expert himself, Mr. Todd A. Davis. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Thanks so much, guys. From now on, let's just go ahead and say Todd Double Penetration Davis.
Greatest DP since Dean Cundy, that son of a bitch.
The D and DP does. The D and DP does stand for Davis. A lot of people don't realize that.
Davis penetration.
Davis penetration.
Well, we've got a new series we're working on this week, fellas. I'm excited about it. This is a short series. It's only three episodes long. It's a trilogy, but this series is also kind of a sequel to our previous series on Tobe Hooper, and also a semi-sequel to our most recent series on Dan O'Bannon, which is kind of fun.
This was called The Death of Tobe Hooper.
We're not getting that far into the Tobe Hooper. I don't think we're going to talk about.
I was semi during most of this movie.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, Patrick Stewart, good God almighty.
Oh, with a little bit of hair on the side.
It's a horizontal mohawk. Yes, sir. Thank you.
But, you know, Gary, I don't know that unless we have like a lot of like request or high demand for it, I don't know that we'll get into the latter career of Tobe Hooper. But hey, if the people speak up and the people want a third Tobe Hooper series where we talk about some of those later films, maybe we'll do it. But some of those are honestly a little rough. There are a couple gems here and there. I think his Toolbox Murders remake is pretty good. I remember liking The Mangler when I was 15, but I have not seen it since then, so I don't know.
Yeah, when I said The Death of Tobe Hooper, I meant his career mainly.
This is that is kind of what we're doing here. The last real hurrah for Tobe Hooper before he was kind of relegated to the made for video bargain bin, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is like his last major
the beginning of the end starts with the movie we're talking about this week, to be honest. Not in terms of quality, because I personally really like all three of the movies we're talking about on this series, but as far as, you know, financial and critical success, these were not the shining examples of Tobe Hooper's career. So let's get into it. You ready? Are you guys having fun? Are you guys having fun tonight?
I'm so ready. Oh my God.
We haven't really done anything. I mean, we laughed about double penetration. I mean, as far as that goes, I suppose I'm having a good time. It seems fun. It seems fun.
What, double penetration?
I'm always having a good time when I see the two of you, which it doesn't happen as often as it used to because of the world. But
yeah, but we're all vaxxed up now, and the CDC says we can lick each other's faces now.
Oh, thank God!
It's time.
Before you know it, we might be recording this thing in person again.
I've almost completely lost my taste for doorknobs. So
I
need to get back out there.
My tongue will be in all of your holes.
Wow. Even the nostrils.
Yeah. Even all of them. I mean, you got to just take advantage. You
I'm not here to
learn a
kink shame
new,
you, Gary.
I've got a new lease on life.
All right. So at the conclusion of our series, The Tragedy of Tobe Hooper that we just alluded to, we covered the director's infamous big budget studio horror film Poltergeist. Great episode. It's a great story behind that movie, I think. You know, the movie was a big success, but as we discussed in that episode, the controversy and the bad press surrounding it, fueled by speculation that film's producer, Steven Spielberg, directed much of the film, really hurt Hooper's reputation and his career. And as a result, Tobe Hooper had a hard time finding a follow-up to that film, at least one that he cared to be a part of. As we discussed last week, Tobe Hooper was, for a time, attached to Return of the Living Dead. And in 1983, Hooper was ready to shoot the film, but it took a while for financing to come together on the film. And here's what Dan O'Bannon, the screenwriter and eventual director of The Return of the Living Dead, had to say about Hooper's participation. This is from the October 1985 issue of Cinefantastique magazine. Quote, "I scripted it more or less the way Tobe Hooper wanted it. He came up with some cute ideas, and I did too, but it was mainly geared towards his tastes. Then the backers, Hemdell, began having money problems because they were raising the cash on foreign distribution sales, and it was taking ages. So Tobe Hooper, you know, instead of waiting to direct a film that may or may not ever even happen, moved on. He left the film. He left, O'Bannon ended up, of course, directing the film once it secured financing. But this left Hooper the availability to direct something else, another project, one that happened to be actually another film scripted by Dan O'Bannon. That's the film that we're talking about today, which is 1985's Life Force.
They watched. They waited. Now their time has come. Out of the depths of space, the ultimate terror. Moving, searching, destroying. From body to body, from life to life, from man to woman. Changing, growing, burning for our life force. From the director of Poltergeist, from the special effects creator of Star Trek, the motion picture, Life Force. In the blink of an eye, the terror begins.
When you talk about, what exactly he was free to do in terms of choices and scheduling, it makes me wonder, like, how many irons do you keep in the fire? Because it seems like there's directors who, have, like 2 or 3 things come out in a year, or then you got guys like, Chris Nolan, who is adamant about seeing a project through from pre all the way through post-production and the premiere before touching another project.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with just the director's personality, maybe.
Yeah.
Or how they like to work, how they prefer to work. And, you'll have Steven Spielberg, for example, on one extreme end of that spectrum. He'll be filming a movie. It goes into post-production. He's already in pre-production on another movie while he's in post-production on one movie. He's finishing up the effects on Jurassic Park and he's shooting Schindler's List. Right. And but then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got someone like Chris Nolan who takes it a little more slowly and a little more methodically. I think most directors are probably somewhere in between. They might be developing projects from at different stages. Guillermo del Toro comes to mind because he's always got these. He's like an idea guy. He's always got like ideas and in mind of projects he'd like to work on, and maybe they're at various stages of actually existing. But a lot of times those don't ever come to fruition. And I think it also probably works very differently for maybe a director who is also a writer, like a Quentin Tarantino type.
Sure. There's so many directors that have so many, they're directing, but they're focused on one particular thing, be it cinematography, the script, the acting. You hear about those. An actor's director trying to figure out all that stuff. Oof.
Well, it's interesting too. Even with this one, to hear some of my notes today come from Tobe Hooper's commentary on the Shout Factory Blu-ray, and to hear him talk about with Dan O'Bannon, for instance, like when he left Returning of the Living Dead and got hired on here, he talks about Dan O'Bannon, that Dan O'Bannon was also writing this script with him. Dan O'Bannon was writing the script, don't get me wrong, but like Toby would say, they were tossing notes back and forth to each other during production of this movie the entire time. Like, it was also being written, and this also would have been, Hooper had just left the making of Return of the Living Dead, so there's a lot of overlap, I guess, is where I'm going.
Yeah.
So to rewind a little bit, though, in the summer of 1983, a couple of movie moguls by the name of Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus, who described themselves as the world's leading purveyors of B movies. That's a self-description by these guys.
I think that name is actually, to hear people say it, they always go like Machim Golan.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't speak Yiddish, and I apologize if I mispronounced it.
I will
probably only refer to them by their last names for the rest of the episode anyway.
There you go.
So that I don't have to try to stumble over that.
I'm not sure if I'm being anti-Semitic by even trying. So
I don't think you are. I think you're trying to pronounce someone's name correctly.
Right.
Golan and Globus does kind of sound like a bluegrass duo. Doesn't it?
Israeli
they have a bluegrass
Israeli
band.
bluegrass duo. I would see that show. It's awesome.
So these guys, they
perform
were
Canon in D.
stupid.
I hate myself that I did that. But I had
So
to.
these guys, they were preparing to, in the summer of 1983, they're preparing to finance a big budget adaptation of a 1976 sci-fi horror novel called The Space Vampires, written by prolific author by the name of Colin Wilson. I say prolific, this was his 51st novel that was published.
Oh,
so the guy was churning them out, and they were like trash paperback,
Oh, okay.
pulp novels.
Not according to Mama Wilson.
Well, Mama Wilson was not the strictest critic. So if you're a fan of B movies, especially those from the 1980s, then the names of Golan and Globus might sound familiar to you. If they don't, then surely the name of their production company does. They were the head honchos of Cannon Films, having purchased the fledgling company back in 1979, or at least purchased a ruling stake in it.
That was the Canon and D joke. See, that's what I was doing.
Thanks,
there.
Gary. We
Yeah.
got it.
For those of you just joining,
Golan and Globus, these were two Israeli cousins who had begun their career in the early 1960s. And they had a business model where they would buy these bottom of the barrel scripts, put them into production, often with very low budgets, at least in the early days, and make a pretty penny off of it. And these early successes by doing this allowed them to start putting bigger and bigger budgets behind their films. But even when they started doing that, they never really lost that B movie spirit. Now, I should say that Cannon Films they were known for doing action movies and B movies, but they also did art films as well, like stuff that would play in art house cinemas. But obviously it was the B movies and the action movies that they were doing that were kind of making them all the money. When you think of 80s B movies and action movies, there's a very good chance that at least some of those films that you're thinking about are Cannon films by the Cannon Group. These are the guys that are responsible for the Death Wish sequels that got more and more ridiculous as they went. The Chuck Norris action movies. These guys basically made Chuck Norris an action star with movies like The Delta Force, Missing in Action, and Invasion USA. These guys are the guys who did the Ninja trilogy. They did American Ninja. They also did musicals and comedies, movies like Breakin' and The Last American Virgin. So, movies that were very, very popular for a handful of years in the 1980s.
Didn't you feel on some weird Missing in Action binge not too long ago or something?
I watched the first one.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Which was filmed as the second one. I don't know. Maybe we'll do a Missing in Action.
I always liked Invasion USA. I saw that a ton of times as a kid.
Yeah.
Well, I
Missing
feel like
in
they
Action
could do
was weird because they filmed the two back to back, and then they realized the second one was better, so they released it first. Then they released the second one. It's called like Missing in Action Back to the Beginning or something, and it's like made as like a prequel because it was actually filmed first. Really weird, but the first one is better.
I do feel like they could do a version of The Producers about these guys.
Yeah,
I think
it would be entertaining.
A lot.
If you want to know more
fun.
about Cannon Films, I'll say there's a really great documentary about it called Electric Boogaloo: The Wild Story of Cannon Films, or something along those lines. It's a really, really great documentary. It's by the same director that did Not Quite Hollywood, which is a great documentary about exploitation movies. But check that out. Electric Boogaloo, really, really entertaining documentary about their entire career, the kind of the rise and fall of Cannon Films. But they actually there's a pretty, sizable chunk of that film, of that documentary, that covers Life Force.
Oh, nice.
Let's not forget Michael Dudikoff.
How could we?
The American
they also
ninja
kind
himself.
of made his career.
Yeah. As much as he has a career.
As he had a career. So by the mid-1980s, these guys, they were at their peak, and they were ready to tackle big concept stories like the space vampires. And they knew exactly who they wanted to helmet. They wanted the guy behind the 1, 2, 3 punch of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Salem's Lot, and Poltergeist. They wanted Tobe Hooper. And they approached him, and basically they had a meeting with Tobe Hooper, and they had a paperback copy of the Space Vampires, slid it across the desk, and they're like, this is your next movie. So that's kind of how the meeting went.
Nice.
And they quickly offered Hooper a 3-picture deal with Cannon Films, an arrangement that, as we'll discuss over the course of this series, would prove to have a major effect on Hooper's career going forward.
Now, according to Joe Bob Briggs's obituary he wrote for Tobe Hooper, he mentions in there as though the 3-picture deal was with the understanding that the third film, he would get
Texas
2 pet
Chainsaw
projects or projects he was super interested in, and then it would be Texas Chainsaw sequel.
Right. Yeah. And I've read that same information as well. I couldn't find any other information other than the article you're referring to, Gary, but Joe Bob's intel is usually pretty spot on. So I think that's probably pretty accurate. Although the exposition heavy novel and the final film differ quite a bit, especially in the second half, Hooper saw a lot of potential in the Space Vampires. He had grown up as a fan of the British Quatermass TV series from the 50s and 60s, which is about this explorer who has a lot of interactions with UFO, aliens and things like that. And he saw this film or this novel as a way to show homage to those productions that he loved so much as a kid. And at the same time, it looked like the Space Vampires, if you read the concept and read the script, this is going to be a big production filled with special effects and complex set pieces, which would make it kind of a perfect follow-up to Poltergeist.
Hooper says what he liked about the book was that he loved it had to do with relationships between men and women and how the dominance can turn on a dime. So he definitely felt like there was some depth there to plunge into. But overall, everything I've read, Hooper has or had nice things to say about Cannon all the way around. Basically, that they're showmen, they love movies. When he describes meeting and everything I read for this one, he says, as far as he knows, it was all started by this Israeli filmmaker, Boaz Davidson, who, if I'm not mistaken, did a lot of the Delta Force stuff for them. And he was in with the Cannon guys. And he says that Boaz was talking to Golan and said, you got to meet this guy. You'll love him. He's a crazy guy, but he in a good filmmaker kind of way. And so he said it set up the meeting. And he said that literally the meeting was like Justin said. He said that they were sitting at a desk. Golan pushes the novel over to him and says, you go read this and do this movie. And Hooper was like, okay. And took the book and started to walk out. And he said, as he was leaving, Golan said, hey, Tobe. And Tobe turned around and Golan was like, I mean it. We're doing this movie. That was really it. He said it was that simple with Cannon. You bypass all the other bullshit. They legit flew him to Palm Springs. He sat out on the beach. He read the novel. By the time he'd finished the weekend, his agents had negotiated the deal.
Yeah, these guys, they would just kind of throw money at things, which in the long run did not contribute to their longevity. But they... The story of Cannon Films is really interesting. I mean, we could do a whole series. Hell, you could do an entire podcast just on Cannon Films. They produced hundreds of films. I mean, even their unfilmed or unmade things have great stories. Like they had the rights to Spider-Man in the 1980s. They paid Marvel like $250,000 for the rights to do a Spider-Man movie. They had the rights for 5 years, and then they never got it off the ground. So the rights, went back to Marvel, which is how Sam Raimi ended up making the movie later on.
Was there a
so they've got a great story.
Was there a Cannon Spider-Man script out there by chance?
I have no idea. I haven't looked into it that far.
All right.
So I'm not really sure.
I'll be jotting that
down.
But I bet it would have been shitty.
Probably, yes. So they've got Tobe Hooper on board, and now comes the task of adapting the novel to fit the screen. Dan O'Bannon and Don Jakoby, who had collaborated on Blue Thunder, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, they were brought on to write the screenplay. But the novel's futuristic setting, which was it was set at the end of the 21st century, way in the future, that proved to be kind of a stumbling block for them. Hooper specifically found it too distanced, like too remote for a horror film or a thriller. In essence, he found that it would be hard for audiences to put themselves in the shoes of the protagonists, which is something that is vital for a horror film to be effective. You have to be able to kind of relate to the protagonist. So instead, Hooper made the decision to set the film in 1986, which was the actual year that Halley's Comet would return and fly, do a close flyby to Earth. So this was something that was in the news at the time that this movie was coming out. And doing this gave the viewers an actual real life future event to dwell on.
No, it's a good way to go.
He
It
said
makes me think of like 200012 when people were freaking out about that shit.
That movie
Yeah, he
didn't
said
turn
that
out
there
well.
was a lot of the stuff on the news at that time was like this, it's a world-ending event, like there was a lot of that going around. So it made sense to him. And he felt like they didn't have to model so much advanced tech. He just thought being too sci-fi in this film wasn't appropriate, I think is how he put it.
Since the dawn of man, comets have been seen as like omens for bad things happening. So the fact that, in this movie, it is not only an omen for bad things happening, but it actually brings the bad things to us. Like that's kind of a fun play on that concept, I think.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
So they make this decision to kind of set it in more modern times, more present day, and they were able to quickly get it together. Script came together and everything, and it came together pretty quickly and went into pre-production with a then pretty huge budget of $25 million and a crew of over 400 artists, including a 40-person prosthetics team. This is a big production, one of the biggest, if not the biggest production that Canon Films had done so far.
Even 1980s, that sounds huge. The 40-person prosthetics.
That's
thing.
massive for this time.
Yeah, they were, like you said, I mean, they just kind of threw money at it. I mean, I mentioned earlier, but a lot of the script happened as production was happening. He said, just immediately he had already, this is the only person we've seen say this. He said he liked Dan. He knew Dan O'Bannon. And so that was really it. He knew he wanted him to write it.
His wife liked them, it seemed like.
Right.
She
He
had nice
immediately
words to say for him.
he just called Dan O'Bannon and says, I want to hire you to do this thing. And he did. And he said they'd have the calls where they toss ideas back and forth or tweak things as Hooper wanted, but it was pretty simple. He already had John Graysmark immediately signed on as the production design. So they just started work on that stuff. And he said a lot of the crew actually were people that had worked on like 2001. But, going back to like what of his ideas, he mentions in several interviews I saw that in his mind, he envisioned a 70 millimeter Hammer film. Like he loved the Hammer movies also. So that's what they were going for. Like with the ship, he was saying when he would try to describe it, he was like, give me something really weird looking, but like a Dracula's castle in space. But like his other note would have been like, definitely don't come close to Giger because that would be sinful right now. And he said, so he said, maybe we're going more of I think he said a curvy Escher painting.
So, and to put that $25 million budget in context, this is 1984 or so when they're going into production. 1982, 2 years earlier, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, $11 million.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that kind of gives you an idea of just how massive this production was compared to other even genre films of the time. So to help him pull off this massive undertaking, Hooper was paired with cinematographer Alan Hume, who had begun his career working on Hammer horror movies. So it's funny you say that, Gary, that was his inspiration. Like this guy, that's where he started his career. And he had actually most recently been the cinematographer on Return of the Jedi. And they did shoot this movie in 70 millimeter, which is insane to me to shoot a movie this, because as we're going to talk about, the movie's fucking weird. And to shoot a movie like this on 70 millimeter I just love it. Like that's an insane decision that would never happen today. And it just kind of thrills me that it exists, and that if there were a repertory theater around where we live that had the capability of showing 70 millimeter film, you could see this movie projected in 70 millimeter somewhere. That would be amazing.
So, I mean, just for my own, and maybe there's someone out there. Standard 35, right?
Correct. So this means a negative 70 millimeter is a negative twice as big as a regular standard film, which means that you're getting twice as much detail and everything in it.
So it's closer to like IMAX format, which this was way before IMAX.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So another key player here was special effects man John Dykstra, an Oscar-winning legend in the effects field who had given us the effects in a little movie called Star Wars. He'd also worked on Battlestar Galactica. He'd also done the effects for Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
That's two Star Trek. That's two Star Trek references
so far,
and we're not done yet.
John Dykstra is kind of the godfather of modern effects. Like this guy is just his work on Star Wars alone is absolutely legendary. Like he was breaking ground on that movie left and right. And then in front of the camera, Hooper cast a fellow Texan by the name of Steve Railsback as Colonel Tom Carlson. Carlson had previously appeared in cult films like The Stuntman, Turkey Shoot, and probably most famously as Charles Manson in Helter Skelter, a movie that he starred in alongside Marilyn Burns in one of her only other film credits outside of the Tobe Hooper films.
Oh, okay, cool.
But just in a weird twist of things, that's how these things happen. Hooper says that he liked Railsback because of The Stuntman. That's what he was thinking of. But they knew each other because apparently Hooper would come visit Marilyn Burns on the set of Helter Skelter. Railsback says that the hard thing for him was that after that role as Manson, he was offered every single killer you can imagine in every possible adaptation constantly. So he just felt like, I got to do something totally different than this, or this is all I'm ever going to be.
All I'm going to do is be a crazy guy. Turns out he plays a hero in this who also comes across as a crazy guy.
Right. But he said he trusted Toby. Like he knew him from there, and he felt like he knew what he was doing, and he loved the idea of experience of the location they were going to and all of this stuff. So it just came together nicely, I guess.
And much of the rest of the cast was comprised of veteran British actors, like guys like Peter Firth, Frank Finlay, although the Frank Finlay role was a role that was originally meant for Klaus Kinski. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Klaus Kinski. He was a frequent collaborator of Werner Herzog, and he is a genuine insane person.
He's a psycho.
And that would have fundamentally changed the film, possibly for the better, to be honest. I think it would have been fun to watch.
Nice.
You also had
just want to
Aubrey
see
Morris.
the experiment of him crossing paths with different people.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, Captain Jean-Luc Picard himself, well, at this point, future Captain Jean-Luc Picard himself, Sir Patrick Stewart.
Even at one point, he's in a wheelchair. They wheel him out. So I thought of Professor X, too. A pre-audition for that. There was a guy in one of the crew I saw that just interesting. Brian Carroll was his name. He was one of the people on the Churchill, and he was killed in a car accident. Like he had a bigger role, and they had to cut it down in post-production and editing.
Oh, wow.
So he ends up being more like an extra in the movie. But I just thought that was a weird thing. Also, the two male vampires, by the way.
Isn't one of them Billy Idol's brother?
One of them is Chris Jagger, who is Mick
Chris
Jagger.
But Billy Idol was supposed to be one.
They wanted Billy Idol for the other one. They couldn't work it out.
Chris Jagger, being Mick Jagger's brother, is one of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
And then Billy Idol was going to be the other one?
Yeah, Billy Idol was going to be the other one, but it didn't work out. But this is 2 weeks in a row where we have some reference to Mick Jagger, too, because the score for Return of the Living Dead was apparently written by the keyboardist for the
and
Stones.
Also the Billy Idol thing is not totally as random as it seems, because
he looks like a vampire.
No, Tobe Hooper directed a Billy Idol music video.
Yeah.
So this was before, it's kind of common now for film directors to direct music videos, or for film directors to come from the world of music videos. Like they started out, like someone like David Fincher started out in music videos and moved into feature film directing. Just this week, as we're recording this, there was a music video from Donovan that just came out that's directed by David Lynch. So this is more common now, but at the time, it was not common for a feature film director to direct music videos. First of all, music videos were very, very new. But yeah, I think it was actually a 1984, 1985, around the time of this movie's production, Tobe Hooper directed the Billy Idol Dancing with Myself music video.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of what he was doing in in between movies time. Where were we? We're talking about the cast, right? So if you're talking about the cast of this movie, probably the most memorable cast member of the film, especially for 15-year-old boys or 39-year-old boys, is Matilda May as the alien space girl. But she's just credited as space girl. Did you guys notice Matilda May's performance in this film?
Which one was she again?
She's the other. She's not. There's two guy vampires, and then there's one lady vampire who hangs out occasionally. You remember her?
Can you describe her?
There's a couple of details that make her stand out, but like other than if you don't happen to notice those, you will never.
So Matilda May, only 20 years old at the time of filming this. This was her first real movie role. She had a couple of like very, very small roles before this. This is her first real movie role, although she would go on to have a pretty long, successful career, although her career was primarily in films produced in her native France.
I think you're supposed to, looking at our notes, I think films are supposed to have quotes around that, Justin.
No, they're real movies. She made a real movie.
One's got Harvey Keitel in it.
She was an actual actor. She was also in The Jackal with Richard Gere and Bruce Willis.
Oh, really?
Yeah, wow.
Like the late 90s, yeah, 97. She plays one of their wives. I can't remember because I haven't seen that movie since like 97. Yeah, she's in that.
Nice.
Yeah, but most of her movies were French. As you may have noticed, if you've watched this film, one detail that may have stood out to you is that Matilda May appears fully nude for a large chunk of the film's runtime.
Oh, Matilda May. Oh,
yeah. That's her. That's the one. That's the one you're thinking of.
Okay.
So, but this is Tobe Hooper, I think, once again pushing the envelope for what's acceptable in a mainstream movie. But it's funny, if you listen to Hooper talk about this, he tries to downplay it. He tries to downplay the nudity in Life Force. He kind of views it the same way he views the violence in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Here's a quote from him from Cinefantastic magazine where they asked him about this.
There is nudity, but there isn't a lot of nudity. The nudity was handled in the same way as the blood and gore we had in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, man. Most of it is in the mind's eye. It's there. There are also shadows and motion that act as clothing, so you think you see much more than you do. There was no way around the nudity. We find humanoids in space, and I couldn't rationalize finding them clothed.
I just want to call bullshit, first of all.
Well, yeah. First of all, the shadows and motion as acting as clothing is like, you're really reaching there, Tobe.
Yeah. You see more than you think you do. No, you definitely see plenty of nudity. And say what you will, don't expect to have naked people running around through a movie and it not become a topic of conversation.
Yeah,
maybe one day we'll get there.
You have to notice you don't see any of the dude aliens with their dork hanging out. You know, that was a heavy metal reference, by the way.
Look, you shot this thing in 70 millimeter. I can practically count the pores in her areola. Okay. Like, don't play like it's something it's not, Toby.
Tobe Hooper also I think it's on the commentary to this. He talks about how they had her, much like they did with Linnea Quigley in Return of the Living Dead. They had her shave. And then they're like, oh, no, we can't do this. Like, now you can see even more. So Tobe Hooper, I think and I didn't write this down, but I think his quote is something like, so we had her, we asked her to grow her little bikini thing back.
Yeah.
Meaning her pubes, I guess.
Yeah, that was it. They had her wax, and then, the producers and stuff were like, no, now I think the quote was too nude. Like,
yeah, you see her, like, now we just see her labia.
Yeah. And this is all, by the way, not to say I don't think Matilda May is incredible, because I do in many ways, obviously. But this is a woman who was not a trained actress. She was actually a ballet dancer and had done that her whole life until an agent found her and thought she could make it in acting. And then she thought, respectfully, that you don't just become an actor. She thought it would take like years to learn how to be an actor. And but then all of a sudden she's like getting cast. Like, I mean, she got cast in those, like we said, 2 like French movies. One was like Dream One, I think that's the one with Harvey Keitel. But anyway, she says she gets the call from her agent telling her she has to run to London for this movie because it could be a really huge deal. So she leaves, and there's lots of stories about how she got the role by being one of the only women who was willing to do all of the nudity, and that's partially true, but she wasn't like immediately on board for that. As soon as she read that part, she talks about calling her agent and crying, being like, they want me naked all the time. I can't do this. And the agent finally convinced her, saying, this isn't like it's an erotic film. This is a big science fiction movie. So it'll be different. It won't be erotic. So she thinks that partially had something to do with it, that she wasn't trying to be erotic with her body. She was trying to be like stone cold. And
turns out when you look like that and walk around naked for the entire film, turns out to be erotic anyway.
Yeah. They but they talk about, even Hooper gives her something like maybe the dancing helped her with her, like making her a little off in the way she moves and that sort of thing. That makes
sense. A lot of dancers, can turn and will a lot of movies will hire dancers to do roles that are very physical, or often like playing aliens and things like that, because they can do bizarre movements. Like we talked about last week, the guy who played Tarman was a dancer. He could do these weird dance like movements that don't feel quite human.
Right. Hooper says it was probably his 50th screen test that he got to her, and he just immediately loved her. Duh. But
as you do.
Yeah. He said they took all the proper modesty precautions and all the actors were very protective of her. Railsback says that 100% there was no BS allowed on set with her when it came with her being nude. You got to remember, she's not only an inexperienced actor, she's 20 years old. Yeah.
She's very young.
And for her, the other strange part is she didn't even speak English. So here and in her other role, she was just, anytime she spoke English, she was learning lines phonetically. So she was just trying to pick up what people said. So for her, she talks about this was the first time away from her family for an extended period of time. And she was entirely alone, didn't speak the language. I can't even imagine how that was. But she said what warmed her up is one day, she doesn't even know how they found out, I guess maybe on her file or something, but they found out it was their birthday and the whole crew brought her cake and stuff and saying happy birthday. And so she felt like she was finally with people she could trust.
That's nice.
But she describes Tobe as very introverted, but elegant and nice.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. She said her sensibilities despised his Texas accent. So, because she was learning English while she did this. So she was drawn to Frank Finley because she called his English his music is how she described it. He had the proper stage trained actor. She said by the time she got back home, she had learned a lot of English during the making of this film, and she had picked up an English accent and somehow had also gotten a Cockney style to it. So her family's like, being all French and like, oh, my love, how are you? And she's just like, I'm good, governor. How are you?
It sounded like Dick Van Dyke from Mary Poppins.
But yeah, that waxing thing, that's not unlike like we said, the Linnea Quigley thing, or Linnea Quigley had to grow out some pubes, or she had to get up.
Well, she ended up,
I guess.
Yeah, putting on
I thought that was just interesting.
A privacy prosthetic.
Yeah. I was just thinking it was interesting because I'm like, wow, 85 was a big year in terms of studios finding their footing with vagina on film.
Or hiding vagina on film.
Right.
Progressive, regressive. Let's discuss, fellas.
So shooting under the name Space Vampires, the film was shot at Elstree Studios in England, where it stretched over 4 giant sound stages beginning in February of 1984. The shoot lasted 6 months. Like I said, this was huge. This is a long shoot, a huge, massive production. It took up there were over 3 dozen sets created specifically for the film. And some of these sets were like truly massive. Probably the biggest was the full destruction of a London street, towards the end of the film. A scene that was so big that it reportedly took an entire month to shoot. Other complex scenes, complex to shoot, included creating a weightless environment on the alien spaceship and on the space shuttle, the Churchill. Tobe Hooper tells stories of people, puking during that scene because they were on wires floating, being flipped around all day.
I mean, they were the astronauts. Like, it was done by the same people who did Richard Donner's Superman. As far as all those scenes go, but yeah, they were legitimately like dangling like 50 feet in the air. Housefact says, like, if you wiggled wrong and somebody started to pendulum, then it set off a chain reaction and everybody would start shaking. And then everybody started barfing and they would throw up inside their helmets. And they would like throw up. They'd lower them. They'd get down. He'd take off his helmet. They'd clean up the helmet. And he'd have to get himself together and like, all right, let's do it again. And so they have to go back up.
Tobe Hooper's got a really bad luck with people like just puking all over each other. Remember the Funhouse?
Oh yeah, that's right. that's funny you say that. Yeah, just vomit from above. He's got a thing for that.
So John Dykstra's company.
Wait a minute. Was that his goal the entire time?
It probably was.
Maybe that's his kink. Let's not kink shame.
Not going to do it.
Okay.
Hey,
all right.
That's your thing. That's fine. But don't subject other people to it if they're not into it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Exactly.
It's all about. Anyway, let's get on.
The actors were being paid. The Funhouse, it was like extras that accidentally got left on a ride.
Yeah.
Okay.
These guys signed up for it.
Side fun fact: the Churchill was named after Winston Churchill.
Wait a minute.
What?
What?
Just wanted to throw that in there for anybody who missed that.
Did you read that on the IMDb trivia?
I really did read that.
There's all kinds of connections and layers.
So John Dykstra's company was in charge of creating these effects and others, including the laser wisps that act as a kind of human life force being released. It's a really cool effect, I think, that they created for that. And the effects, especially that one, they do bring to mind to me Poltergeist. With the blue light and all that, like it feels very like, I feel like Tobe Hooper took some pointers and took some ideas from his work with Spielberg. You know, I feel like he took some of that to heart and utilizes some of it here as well.
Yeah, you got to learn and grow and get yourself to that higher level. Absolutely.
They had Elstree Studios, which was like stage 6 for Star Wars. Which is built by George Lucas.
Is enormous.
Yeah, that was one of their stages. They were like bouncing all over the place, but they had the Bond stage. Like a lot of it was done there that we've talked about before, because this was during the filming of Return to Oz and Legend. And remember in Legend, we talked about the fire that broke out on the Bond stage and burned up a whole bunch of shit. They were part of that. They were there during that time filming this movie.
So they filmed part of it at Pinewood as well?
Maybe it was Pinewood. Yeah. Well, no, is Pinewood the one in LA?
Pinewood's in England.
Okay, so yeah, it's the one in England. It's like in I forget. It starts with a B. Something in.
I mean, there is a Pinewood in Atlanta as well, but I don't think they filmed James Bond there. No, they filmed James Bond at Pinewood Studios.
Specifically, I think a lot of it was the shuttle. The interior of the shuttle, or like stuff in the shuttle, was filmed in like where the Overlook lobby was filmed.
Oh,
which
cool.
was which all burned up like in that fire.
Yeah, that's wild. So it was. I think Elstree maybe was their main studio that they filmed at.
That may be.
Then maybe some of the bigger stuff like that they've had to film at Pinewood. I'm not sure.
They I know specifically too. They talked about in the commentary like all the stuff with Stewart with the that office and everything, like those interiors. What wasn't like most of it I think was a set. But that was where like Indiana Jones was shot. Like he said, like he pointed out one of the spots was like specifically where or like in Raiders, I mean, where like the ball is like rolling after Indy. He's like, this is like, he was like, that happened right there. And like pointed that out. But
wow,
it's kind of interesting.
So the filming, by pretty much all accounts, was very smooth. No big issues other than, actors puking on each other. And Hooper's cast was never shy about really singing Hooper's praises as a director. They really liked him, which you would hope would help settle some of the previous rumors about his directing once and for all. Steve Railsback, in an interview with Starlog magazine, said this film will prove that Tobe's a talented director who has unfairly taken some bum raps. Life Force will show people that he was the one who directed Poltergeist and that he is a filmmaker to be reckoned with. So, even the actors on this, they're like, we got to help Tobe Hooper clear his name, I guess.
Sad that doesn't really do that for him, but it's
maybe
nice
if this film had done. Maybe if this film had been more successful, it would have. I don't know.
A lot of the actors, though, when you do watch like I don't know, interviews with them and that sort of thing, you definitely get the feeling like they all had a great time on this one. Like nobody's complaining about it. They all seem to love Hooper, and are you know, like I know at least, and they, you know, I guess they're paid to be there, but even in the Shout Factory release and stuff, a lot of them are like, we're glad this is finally getting a release and getting recognized and yada yada yada.
And a few years later, a few years after the film was released, Patrick Stewart, he's being interviewed about his recent hire as the new captain of the Enterprise. And he begins talking in these interviews about some of the prominent directors that he'd had a chance to work with in the past. People like David Lynch and John Borman, and of course, Tobe Hooper. And he said of Tobe Hooper, he said, quote, "Of all the movies we've been discussing, Tobe Hooper was the director to whom I got the closest. I liked him very much and I admired his work. As compared to my experience with David Lynch and John Borman, Tobe was much more accessible. Tobe's an interesting man, very enthusiastic, very much a presence on the set. Life Force was one of the best experiences I've had as an actor."
Steve Railsback was his first on-screen kiss. I saw that in a David Letterman interview.
Like,
you know,
first,
they're like your first
like ever?
Yeah,
Not that's
not like
funny.
probably not on stage, but like on screen,
on
like on the
screen.
big screen, I guess, was Steve Railsback.
That's really funny.
His first on-screen kiss. They're like, "Who's your first kiss?" He's like, "Oh, Steve Railsback." Toby gives him a lot of credit, like, you know, because they bring that up in the commentary. That it's Tim Sullivan, I think, he's interviewing, but he's like, you know, Patrick Stewart's like praises you regularly, like says you're one of his favorite directors he's ever worked with.
I think he's said, I don't know how recently he said it, but that interview that I quoted was, you know, that's when he got hired as Picard, which was 3 years after this.
87. Yeah.
So, but he still said for years and years after that, he would say that Tobe Hooper was like his favorite director that he'd worked with.
He said Tobe Hooper was like, "That makes me feel really great," because they were like, did you ever think Patrick Stewart would be as big as he is now? And he's like, "Oh yeah, you could tell." Like he just looks big, like he just but he said like all the little details that like Patrick Stewart brought to it, like he said he was like really humble about it, but like there's the scene where he's talking about like, "Where's so-and-so?" And he's like, "Oh, he's in confinement or something." And then he's like, the line was, "He's been bad." But he's like, Patrick Stewart like comes over and says, "What if I said he's been naughty?" He's like, "Please say that. Please say he's been naughty."
It is a great line. Like he nailed it. It's a really great line.
I remember like watching this with my wife, and it got to that line. I was like, "Oh, Picard, you rascal, you."
For anybody who's ever seen Toby, by the way, in an interview on commentaries, he is still the same way. Like he doesn't have a lot to say ever.
Yeah.
Like he just like,
That's why they always have to have somebody on his commentaries who's like asking him questions throughout the film.
Yeah, and it's generally like a lot of it is like, "So I noticed this and this, and the characters would probably be thinking this, and this says this about that person, and yada yada yada." And Toby's like, yeah, probably so. I don't know. He just like he does not elaborate.
So while the filming of the movie went pretty smooth, the shit hit the fan pretty much as soon as principal production wrapped. First, the powers that be at Canon decided that the title Space Vampire sounded too exploitative and too low budget, despite the fact that these guys had previously produced films with titles like Ninja 3, The Domination, The Happy Hooker Goes to Hollywood, and Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo.
I was about to say, like, what a time for Cannon's balls to shrivel up. Like, what just happened here?
Also, is The Happy Hooker Goes to Hollywood, is there a series of like The Melancholy Hooker Goes to Hollywood?
No, it's just the Happy Hooker going to various cities.
Yeah. Oh, it's the Happy Hooker goes to Birmingham.
Okay. Yeah, the Happy Hooker goes to Cleveland is very depressing.
Yeah.
No, maybe that's how it starts, and then by the end of it, Cleveland's a different
happy.
city.
She starts working at a steam factory.
But so since they had dropped $25 million on this movie, they felt a more appropriate title would be Life Force. So Life Force is not a terrible name, but it doesn't really tell you what the movie really is about. Like if I went to see a movie called The Space Vampires, I know exactly what the fuck I'm going to see, you know? And Tobe Hooper wasn't a fan either. He felt it sounded too pretentious, and he felt that it lacked the sense of fun that the title Space Vampires has. Space Vampires is a great title.
Yeah. And you probably wouldn't be like, what the fuck when you see giant bats when you're floating up to the space station or whatever.
I mean, I get that Life Force is one of those titles that's it was kind of in vogue at the time, that like one word, like Poltergeist, like Cocoon, these movies that were coming out around this time, that I guess that was kind of the hip thing at the time. But I don't know, space.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, that was a few years
earlier.
before this. But
Yeah.
I think that's technically 2 words, Gary.
Not the way I do it. I don't know what I'm going for there. I got no joke for that.
And anyway, if that wasn't enough, if the title change wasn't enough, Hooper's film, which ran originally 116 minutes, was cut 3 times at Cannon without the director's approval, resulting in a shorter 99-minute runtime. Now, I have to imagine that the version you guys probably watched was probably the director's cut or the international cut, probably closer to 2 hours.
Yeah.
116 minutes, 120 minutes.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
I think that's pretty much the version that's out now. I think when this movie was released on DVD for the first time, which was in 2001, that's the version that came out. That's the version that's on the Scream Factory. And I think that's the only version on the Scream Factory Blu-ray. I don't think they have the cut down version, which is fine because obviously the longer version is Hooper's preferred.
I was going to say, I feel like there is like an option for original theatrical cut or something like that. But John Grover, the editor, he says in one of the features that they delivered the original version. Golan and Globus thought it was a little bit long, but Grover even said this works. And then the distributor said the picture was too long, and then they wanted to make sure it got shorter. Toby didn't want to make it shorter. Then Grover says all he knows, he left because he had to work on, I think he did the Labyrinth right after. And he said that they just called somebody else in and they slashed it up. I don't know. Toby makes it sound like in the commentary that he wasn't unaware that it was happening. Like that he, kind of tried to help make sure it still made sense, at least when they slashed it.
But he didn't want
Grover from Sesame Street?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
That's the one. Super Grover, actually.
Okay.
So weird that I was going to say that same thing. I was going to be Super Grover did it with his cape and his Knight's helmet on.
Helmet. It's good content there, Todd. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's like, you know what time it is? And he pulls down that little visor. It's nighttime.
So stupid. So the film's trailer.
Is she nude in this one too?
Grover wasn't ready. Oh, God.
So the film's trailer was put in front of surefire hits like Rambo First Blood Part 2, but it didn't seem to matter. Audiences didn't seem to care, and very few people in 1985 bothered to see the movie. Although I have to speculate that maybe if it had had a title like Space Vampires, they'd have known what kind of movie they were getting into, and maybe more people would have turned out for it.
Hooper definitely believes that. I mean, he straight up says it a few times in things I saw that he different one sheet and call it Space Vampires. He's like, we'd be talking about something different.
Yeah, the one sheet is pretty lame. Which is just like a picture of the Earth and then like maybe like an eye at the top, I think,
it
or
looks like
something. It's really generic. But then if you look at the international posters where they've got like the pods that the aliens are in, like flying through space with a naked woman strapped to the side of one of them, like I'd see that fucking movie. Like they're great.
You couldn't put that outside the Regal.
Yeah, well, maybe just put a bikini on her or something. I don't know.
Yeah, gonna blur those nips.
Anyway, when Life Force was released on June 21st, 1985, it opened at number 4 at the box office, losing to a competing sci-fi movie, which is Ron Howard's Cocoon. It earned just over $11 million at the box office in the U.S. Not opening weekend. It earned $11 million total in the U.S.
Ooh,
on a $25 million budget. And not helping matters, critics were also beating it up. It was not a popular movie among, like, audiences were ignoring it, and critics thought it sucked. And so this brings us, of course, to the topic of modern reviewers, Gary. And if they still think it suck, and I don't mean professional reviewers, I don't mean Roger Ebert. or anyone, you know, that gets paid to do this. I just mean people who bought the DVD on Amazon and decided to give their 2 cents worth on it.
Yeah, well, it turns out that not unlike a vampire during the daytime, somebody needs a nap. That was pretty good. I like
Yeah,
that.
nicely
That was
done.
good. So here's Solitary Man 9105125. He says, "No doubt about it" is the title of his review. This movie is the movie that killed the careers of Tobe Hooper and Steve Railsback. That's his whole review.
The career of Steve Railsback.
The career of Steve Railsback. Yep. Here's Magical J. He says,
Wait, that was the whole review? That was his entire review?
yeah, that was it.
Oh, okay.
He was just pointing out it killed the careers
Anyway.
of Tobe Hooper.
Who's the next guy? Violent J?
Magical J. His
Oh,
cousin.
I was hoping it was an ICP.
The only reason to like this movie is Naked Girls. It's absolutely terrible at all things it does. If you've never seen Naked Girls, then watch this trash fest. In 1985, it might have made sense. I was 6. I really don't know why people would rate this higher than the absolute minimum. It has space vampires. Vampires don't exist. So why do we keep forcing dumb concepts in movie, books, and real life? The only true vampires are corporations and governments. Fact. Anyway, if you're easily amused, this old-ass movie might seem campy, or, oh, it's good because no one likes it, and it has naked girls, full naked. Anyway, don't buy it. It's crap.
So his argument against this movie is that it contains vampires, which
Vampires don't
in real life.
exist.
What movie does he only watch? Movies that could happen in real life? Because your choice of movie is severely like cut down.
Well, logic
and
is
did he-
not always part of this.
And did he call them movie books? Did he use the phrase movie books?
Oh, well, no, it was forcing dumb concepts in movie. Oh, he says movie, books, real life. I think he meant to say movies, comma? Books, real life.
Comma.
Yeah.
Grammar's important, kids.
Oh, no,
Grammar's
listen to this one. This is Rob.
Otherwise, you're going to get made fun of on a podcast.
Old Robert DeSantis says, part Event Horizon, part Island of Terror, part total crap. That, I mean, see already, if you're saying total, like it feels like that's the whole, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, you can't be part of. Yeah.
It can't be part
Part
and
Event Horizon, part Island of Terror, part total crap. Total waste of time. If I had seen this at the cinema, I'd be asleep in the first 10 minutes. If I could, I would give this cheap flick a -10. Shame, really, because it just proves that Steve Railsback, one of my favorite actors, is only good at playing deranged villains. Seriously, don't waste your time or money on this piece of dung. Yeah,
What's your language, sir?
Caveat M. Thor says, watchable if you are a vegetable. You're in a full body cast and the controller is not operational. I kept hoping the silhouette heads from MST3K would appear in the foreground and they would begin to roast this clunker minute by minute.
Has there been an MST3K riff track for this? Did they do
I don't know about riff tracks, but not an MST3K.
I did want to include this one just because it's Stanley Strangelove again. And I feel like he comes up, I always find his reviews. Yeah. He says, Life Force should be titled Life Farce. This is an absolutely terrible movie from one of the worst directors of all time, Tobe Hooper. The plot, well, there is none. Hooper just throws in every plot device from every horror and sci-fi movie in a complete mess. Nothing makes sense at all. We have spaceships, which are the cheesiest ones I've ever seen in a film. Vampires, Walking Dead, telepathy, graveyards, an insane asylum, explosions, car wrecks, the military, stupid-looking aliens. All that he left out was werewolves, Frankenstein, the creature from the Black Lagoon, and the kitchen sink. What a schizophrenic mess this is. That was.
There's probably a lot of other stuff he left out of the movie, but
that life farce thing. Though.
Oh man,
that's
there's
good.
so many.
I feel like
but-
Stanley Strangelove has been watching like marathoning Tobe Hooper movies and hating all of them for some reason. Like, why do you continue to watch them if you hate them so much?
Yeah. And I realized that I went long with this one, but I do have like one other one where this guy was just like real upset about this because this was like all big letters and just he just went out. It's Devastation Bob. And he says, Life Force is a late 80s sci-fi horror flick wherein a joint space mission between the U.S. and Great Britain fly out to study Haley's comic and find a giant spaceship full of dead vampires, one sexy naked chick, and 2 Patrick Swayze clones. Of course, they bring them back to Earth, and then the naked chick runs amok, turns half of London into crazed, ravenous zombies, and it's up to our heroes and an SAS man and the lone surviving astronaut to defeat her in a Gothic cathedral before the vampire mothership gets to Earth and rains holy hell down upon us. That's the recap. Now, most people, upon hearing that synopsis, might be like, hell's bells, I want to see me some of that movie. Well, friends, that couldn't be farther from the truth. At 2 hours, Life Force is a chore to sit through. While the key plot points delivered above do happen, some of them happen off screen, and they're reported to us by some bored British character actors. There's a lot of drab office settings where haggard-looking Brits and Steve Railsback sweat a lot and yell. The beginning is mildly engrossing with the spacemen checking out a giant vampire ship, and the end where apparently a soundstage fills in for London, besieged by crazy zombies, picks up a little. Otherwise, there's just a whole lot of nothing in this movie. I checked the credits to see who edited it, but that would mean fast-forwarding the tape for half an hour to get to them. A lot of the time is spent on scholarly types going essentially, maybe these aliens are a source of the vampire myth. Yeah, great. Can we see some vampires maybe, please? Once the splendidly nude bloodsucker lady escapes the lab they bring her to, she pretty much disappears from the picture. We're told she possesses people, which probably saves a lot of money on special effects and pays for more film stock that they could drag the running time even longer. The acting and plot simply aren't engrossing enough to make you not mind the length and boredom of this picture. Maybe they should have called it Life Forced. Someone remake this one. Peace.
Peace.
I love that he talks about fast forwarding the tape, and he's on IMDb. So that's just a weird part of that review I found. Anyway, there are plenty of those if you want to go check out more. Lots of sites have lots of 1-star reviews for Life Force. That one had no problem finding them.
So the critics in 1985 were not fans of this movie. Obviously, as we have witnessed, modern internet reviewers are not fans of this movie. You know who else was not a fan of this movie?
Who's that?
Colin Wilson, the guy who wrote the novel that the film is based on, who called it, quote, the worst film ever made. And derided the film for launching right into the action instead of building to it, despite the fact that the first half of the film adheres pretty closely to the novel. So like what he's criticizing is coming from his novel, as opposed to the second half, which has a bunch of zombies in it, which are definitely not in his book at all. And even John Dykstra, the special effects guy, he had criticisms, although his are a little more valid. He had worked long and hard on the film's optical effects, only to have them ruined in his eyes by poor processing by the lab that handled them, saying, quote, Life Force was probably the worst patch-up job of timing in a movie I've ever seen. There was stuff we had worked on for a long time that came out looking awful because they didn't time it right. They paid good money for those effects, and it's wrong for them to be destroyed by somebody's lack of concern. Ooh. Honestly, it's kind of, that is frustrating because the stuff he's talking about, those effects, those optical effects at the beginning, they do look a little clunky. Like they look a little cheesy, like where you can tell that it's an effect, and we know that John Dykstra is better than that because we've seen his work even previous to that turned out better, but it doesn't ruin the movie for me. I think it's actually kind of charming, but I can see how, as someone who created that work, put a lot of time into it, that would be kind of frustrating. But I do have to, ask you guys, because we haven't discussed it much, critics didn't like it, modern reviewers didn't like it, even some of the people making the movie didn't seem to like it. What do you guys think?
I dug it. Yeah, I'm in. It was
neither of you had seen this before. Is that correct?
Yeah, this was the first viewing for me. I will be completely honest. I did watch it a little tired. We had watched, Friday night is, pizza and TV night for me and the wife. And I feel, so it was the last thing that we watched, and we started it kind of late. So my eyes were getting a little heavy there towards the end, but honestly, this is really solid. I really enjoyed it. I think, I would love to see this get picked up by Shudder or someone and, do some sort of, mini series reboot. I think it's a lot of fun, and I'd love to see this sort of some of the aspects sort of played out and fleshed out a little bit more. I had a blast with it. And yeah, I mean, some of the special effects are dated, but honestly, like hearing the premise, it's, you know, vampires in space and the whole thing. When I first saw that space shuttle, the Churchill, and it's going in at a weird angle with the solar panels out and everything, I was just kind of like, I was fascinated. I was like,
it's a cool image.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I'm on board. Yeah, this is great. And yeah, it didn't let up. And, you know, of course, me being the Star Trek guy, I love Patrick Stewart. You know, he can do no wrong. But yeah, this was a lot of fun.
What do you think, Gary?
I am honestly, I'm kind of ambivalent with the whole thing. Like, I'm colored by loving Tobe Hooper and caring about Tobe Hooper like I know him now. And so there's part of that I think affects my viewing of it. I think the movie is, by no means is it perfect. I think that it's drawn out a little bit. Like I can see how it feels long to some people. It just, you know, it's not my favorite of his by any means. And I bought it on Blu-ray. I'm not going to regret buying it, like I said, but I also
Blu-ray.
I feel like, yeah, it's a really good Blu-ray. And I feel like I don't know. I feel like probably not unlike Mama Hooper at this point. I'm like, that's my baby Toby. He's doing his best. And but I mean, I don't think it's a great movie. I think it's okay. Like it's just, there's a lot of stuff that I do like in it. There are things that, I mean, the concept and some of the effects and that sort of thing are cool. I absolutely, just to throw it out there, and he seems like such a nice guy in everything I've seen him say. So I want to be clear about that this is not personal, but I absolutely hated Steve Railsback in this movie. I hate him. I hate him.
He's terrible. Like, and I say that as someone who genuinely loves this movie, but Steve Railsback, he is pretty awful.
Yeah, I can't stand him. Like he took me right out of the movie on multiple occasions. Like
it doesn't like affect my viewing of it because I like so much other stuff, but there are some moments like where he just is really goofy. Like he's just
something about him.
To say it, but he's just being a bad actor. I mean, like some of the moments that require him to do more than things that are out of his reach as a performer, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching them just like I kept thinking during the movie, and I've seen it a couple of times technically now because I, you know, also watched the commentary track and everything, but always with him, I kept thinking like, why is this the leading guy? Like, why is like, he is just, he's not very good and not very charismatic. And
he's really not.
I don't like him at all.
It's hard to get behind him as a hero.
Which sucks because the best part of this movie for me was probably the first half of the movie, but like going into the second half, it like totally switches over to focusing on him. And I think it fucks the movie because I don't like it.
Like I said, it doesn't hurt my viewing because there's so much other stuff that I like, but I totally understand that point of view because I agree that he's pretty bad in it.
Who else was up for that role? Did we cover that?
I don't know.
It almost sounded like Tobe Hooper just kind of had him in mind. I mean, from the stuff I saw, but
he must have seen something in the guy.
And I haven't seen Helter Skelter, to be honest with you. So maybe, or the Stuntman. So maybe he's great in those. And, you know, so I don't want to bash the guy too much, but I just, you know, obviously Hooper saw something in him, but man, in this movie, like I don't know. I feel like you got to have like an extra level of something to carry what you're dealing with here. And, it's just, I don't know. It's just not there. I'm just like watching Naked Vampire Girl being like, this the dude you chose out of everybody? This is the one.
Well, I don't feel like he was phoning it in though.
No,
he was swinging for the fences for sure.
I'm sure he was. Yeah.
He's trying. So after Poltergeist, Hollywood had decided that Tobe Hooper kind of needed a comeback for some reason, despite the film making tons of money and being a success because of those Spielberg rumors. Like Hollywood decided, like, Tobe, you got to prove yourself that you're actually a very good director, you know, and that you actually could have directed something like Poltergeist. You kind of have to prove yourself. But then when Life Force came out, nobody really gave it a fair shake. The Canon, they recut and retitled his work. The film lad fucked up the effects. And even the film's story was criticized by the guy who wrote the source material. And it wasn't really until after the film was released on home video that it finally started gaining some momentum. And it did end up gaining a cult following. And I kind of understand it's really not hard to see why the film wasn't a major success off the bat. This is a film that seems like it was always destined to be a cult film. It's a very weird movie. It's a strange movie, especially one to throw as much money at as they did. And at the time that it was released, a lot of film critics seem to really dislike evil alien movies. And that was maybe due to the success of films about nice aliens, Close Encounters, E.T., Cocoon, movies like this. And Hooper's film was not the only movie to suffer because of this dismissal by critics, because John Carpenter's The Thing was similarly ignored or maligned for the very same reason, because people couldn't take the idea of an evil alien. They wanted to see a cuddly alien like E.T., despite what Gary's wife might think of E.T.
he ain't cuddly to her, that's for sure.
My wife too. She's not a fan of E.T.
Wow. It's so weird. I don't get it,
He's
but
nice.
whatever. It's
candy.
It's man, I don't know. This movie has a lot happening in it. There's a lot. We didn't even hit on who Hooper calls the walking shriveled, like all of those puppet people that are in there, like that's a weird effect. I mean, it's cool. It's cool. But it's weird, like somehow in the movie. I mean, I guess it makes sense in the movie. I don't know. Something about it. It took me off guard the first time I saw one. I was like, holy crap. Like, what is this?
Because they're using puppets, and they could have definitely just used prosthetics or makeup, but there's something very weird and off-putting about them using puppets to me.
He didn't feel like humans with prosthetics. I think it's similar to what was it we talked about before that was like this?
The one where they're bringing the dead people back and
Dead and Buried.
Dead and Buried. Yeah.
Where they're like, he's like, I saw Hooper say this, that like there were, it's harder to. There's a difference between like getting a skinny guy in prosthetics and like making it truly like a shriveled person,
in a way that wouldn't work if it was somebody in a suit.
Right. And so he obviously saw that here too. And it's interesting to hear him talk about it too. Like, there's like 20 people operating each one of those things, and the wires, where they went and how they staged it and stuff like that. It's cool. It's a cool concept. It's a cool effect and that sort of thing. But I could see like people just being completely like, whoever chose to go see this movie being like, what the fuck am I dealing with here? Like, this is a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot going on. And I mentioned The Thing, and this movie does share some other similarities with The Thing thematically, because both of those movies, and we haven't done an episode on The Thing on this podcast or anything. We will inevitably. The Thing is like top 3 horror movies of all time for me. So we will be talking about The Thing one day. And I know John Carpenter is Gary's probably favorite director. Yeah. Would I be correct in saying that?
I think you would. Yeah.
But both Life Force and The Thing are about a shape-shifting evil that's passed from person to person. They're passed much like a sexually transmitted disease. And that's not me like reaching for a metaphor. Like there's a lot of like academic writing about this era of horror movies, seen as a commentary on the then emerging AIDS epidemic. This movie almost feels like it's commenting on both a fascination and fear of sexuality in general, because I mean, obviously, Matilda May is a incredibly feminine form of sexuality, and it's a really interesting theme for the movie. That when you watch it that way, and when you watch it in that light, it really does become incredibly interesting, I think.
Yeah, I watched it at for face value. Looking back and keeping that in mind makes me want to go watch the movie again. And it's not like, catch all those themes.
Right. And it's not that the film is being heavy-handed in that symbolism. I mean, ultimately, Hooper, I think when he made this, he just wanted to make a movie that's a wild, fun time. But yeah, if you can get some social commentary of some sort in there, let's do it. I mean, I made a joke at the beginning of the show that the movie ends in a double penetration, but I really do think that the way that sword thing goes through both of their bodies is an intentional like metaphor for sexual penetration of some point. Like I don't think that's Hooper. I don't think Hooper accidentally did that, based on the context of the rest of the movie.
That's fair.
Yeah, he's definitely
that's fair
toying with the gender role thing, too, because he talks about that being in the book and one of the things that appealed to him, like the old Steve Railsback being a huge pussy. But
that is what they say about him.
I read his Wikipedia.
Put it in his Wikipedia. I hate that because the guy, like, to hear him talk, like when you see him in interviews and stuff, he seems like such a nice guy. Like he really does. He seems like a great dude.
There are lots of nice guys who aren't good actors. I'm one of them. I think I'm nice to most people.
I was wondering, like, during the time of like, what is Hooper's relationship life like? But I think in '83 he got married to Karen Berger, who's an artist or something. She does costuming on. I think this one's his first one that she does the costume design for, and does it for all 3 Canon movies, if I'm not mistaken.
He met her before this. He didn't like meet her on set.
Yeah, I think he met her right before this.
Okay. For me, I asked you guys your opinion on the movie, but for me, one of the reasons that I was so excited to visit this era in Tobe Hooper's career is because I feel like these 3 movies that we're talking about really represent Hooper's vision in kind of its purest, most undiluted state, at least the most since probably Texas Chainsaw Massacre. All of the films that we've discussed from Hooper so far are, in my opinion, good or good to great for various reasons. But when you see Hooper really get to kind of unleash his absolutely bonkers ideas that are bouncing around in his head with a budget to actually pull them off, you kind of get pure magic. It's really like, imagine if something like as weird as Eaten Alive, if Tobe Hooper had been as unrestrained as he is allowed to be here, because instead of having $6 million, he had $25 million to do a movie like that. Like, can you imagine what kind of insanity we would have gotten?
Actually, that would have been all right. He would have probably had a better looking alligator. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, hopefully. And Hooper's, his filmography is filled with entries that really just feel completely unlike anything else. Like, it's not like every movie, like Texas Chainsaw looks very different from even Eaten Alive or this, but they don't feel like any other movie out there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He more than ever, I feel like he is definitely a perfect exploitation filmmaker in the sense that he does feel like he is trying to push the envelope on everything he makes, and he hates it if he feels restrained to like not be able to like pick something to really go for it on. Even in this one, I think in the commentary, if I'm not mistaken, is where I heard it, but they talked about that score by Mancini, that he loved the score. He was happy with it, but his initial idea, I want to say, was he had heard, God, I wish I'd have written this down, but he had heard he saw some other movie where they didn't have a score, and it was like just the sound effects only. And like, there was like, if anything, there were like weird sounds throughout.
Was it his own movie, Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
I don't think it was Texas Chainsaw, but it was really like he wanted to do that in this one, and said that they, the producers were like, no, let's not.
Yeah, they wanted it to be this big blockbuster epic, I think.
But he was already into, and like his words, I think, were like, we're already doing so many other things nobody else is doing, so let's do this, and
let's just keep being weird. Yeah, he really leans into it, and I think this movie really is kind of the epitome of like Tobe Hooper making singular movies, like movies that nobody else would make, or nobody else would make them in the way that he would. And I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I've told you guys this. It's in my top 3 horror movies of all time, which I said also about John Carpenter's The Thing, but that's
all
true.
Horror movies are in Justin's top 3 horror
my top
movies.
3 here: The Shining, John Carpenter's The Thing, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Those are my top 3 horror movies. So
those are acceptable.
I love Texas Chainsaw, but if I were ranking Tobe Hooper's movies, all three movies that we're talking about in this series, especially this one and Texas Chainsaw 2, would probably be vying for that second place slot. You know, like they're fun because they're just absolutely bonkers, which I really like, you know. And Canon Films, they were, at least they started out as kind of a sleaze factory. Like they put out trash cinema, audacious movies that sometimes managed to be great. Sometimes they managed to be garbage, but still make a lot of money. But it seemed like a kind of a perfect fit for Hooper, especially when you look back at stuff in his career like Eaten Alive. Like this is a guy who did not want to do anything conventionally. He had no interest in doing anything conventionally. Even Poltergeist, his most mainstream film, has a really bizarre structure. Like it ends and then has an entire extra act. We talked about that during that episode, but that's very strange. That's a very strange thing for a major movie to do.
Yeah, unless it's that last Lord of the Rings movie.
Well,
I don't know. Sorry.
You just broke Justin's brain. I watched it happen real time right here on Zoom.
Sorry.
I'm very defensive of the Lord of the Rings movies. But Life Force is far from conventional. I think we can all agree to that. I mean, the structure, we haven't talked about Dan O'Bannon and Don Jakoby's script very much, but their script is kind of nuts in its structure as well. I mean, the plot is basically broken down into several small acts, and each of these acts has its own kind of mini protagonist, each of whom has their own encounter with the space girl. And and it kind of moves along that way. And then from that, Hooper builds this just weird movie that starts off in outer space, this really out there sci-fi stuff, insane production design. As we've learned from Tobe Hooper, the man appreciates some good production design, going all the way back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That's a big deal for him. And then the movie ends with Earth, or at least London, being destroyed, complete with a zombie outbreak. This movie starts in outer space with some weird ass shit, a spaceship that looks like you're walking into a giant vagina.
Yeah,
it does.
Yeah, it does.
And then it ends with zombies running around London, and London's on fire. It's like, that's insane. That's nuts. Yeah. And it gets even nuttier once like Carlson comes back into the story, because we talked about Steve Rails back in his performance. I think at least me and Gary, I don't know where Todd fell on that, but me and Gary at least felt that he wasn't very good, but he does sort of play it like a lunatic the entire time.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, he played Charlie Manson, so I guess playing a lunatic is kind of his thing, even in a character that maybe shouldn't be played that way. But it does kind of hit the way he plays it kind of adds to that fever dream quality of the movie. Like it makes the movie feel even more weird because he's so out there, I guess.
Well, I guess that was kind of the point with his character. His interaction with the space girl on the ship, ended up, he ended up connecting with her, I guess, and looking at stuff like the story of Dracula, that she was his or he was her minion, and ended up, and then shenanigans ensue. But I mean, I guess that's kind of how you have to play it, as manic.
You got to rub up against her, right?
Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, I do like the way that the movie plays with vampire lore. Like the idea that the vampire lore came from these beings who visited Earth eons ago.
Yeah.
And then kind of branched off from there,
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting to me.
Yeah, I dig
like
it.
the idea of you having to kill them with this energy center. Well, that eventually evolved into a stake through the heart, and it's really, I don't know. I think that's a very fun, which I'm sure that comes from the novel, but that's a very fun play on the vampire mythology, I think.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
All of this, I think, adds up to a movie that, like, just when you think this movie, you're watching it and you're like, this can't get any weirder, and then the movie proceeds to just get even weirder than you thought it was going to get. Like it does. It builds the whole movie. It just gets stranger and stranger. And of course, we mentioned it before with the fact that Matilda May walks around naked for most of the movie. That's a weird choice that most filmmakers would not have made. they would either have her go like the Terminator route and put on clothes at the beginning, which she eventually does go the Terminator route because she like drains that girl in the park and they're like, well, she has clothes now. But that's much, much later in the film.
Yeah.
Or the movie would do like the Austin Powers bit where they just like cleverly cover her up, which they kind of do with the dudes in this.
Yeah.
Right.
But not Hooper. He's like, nah, just let it all hang out. That's like, it makes more sense in the story to have this girl's tits out the whole movie.
Well,
I'm sure that was exactly how he worded it in his production notes or whatever.
But another example of the movie's weirdness, one of the weird scenes in the movie to me, which kind of plays into that kind of sexual thematic thing that we were talking about earlier, is where Carlson is trying to psychically extract information from that nurse, the woman who's like, her consciousness has been taken over by the space girl. And he finds out that she's an extreme masochist who wants him to slap her around before giving any info. I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like, that is so bizarre. And then the scene gets even weirder because the doctor guy who's with him, the British guy, he's like,
I like to watch.
I'm going to stick around. He says, after all, I'm a natural voyeur.
Yeah.
What? Like, what movie are we watching?
This movie is on the cusp of porno constantly.
Yes.
Really?
Jeez.
There could definitely be a porno remake of this movie, and it wouldn't change the plot very much.
Right.
So I got to ask you guys, this is a tough one, I think. But if you guys were doing further viewing, if we're going to do further viewing, if you guys were going to do a double feature with this movie and something else, what in the world do you pair with a movie that's this weird, that's not just another Tobe Hooper movie?
Oh, well, now you screwed it up. No, I'm just kidding.
The one that jumps out to me, just because of its unique take on the vampire genre, is From Dusk Till Dawn. I really enjoy that.
Another movie with a bizarre structure too.
Yeah, bizarre structure, and I feel like while they are not the same, I feel like Robert Rodriguez kind of does his own thing, and I feel like Tobe Hooper could have been Robert Rodriguez, maybe if he was born in a different era, or just if the cards had fallen a little bit differently. Robert Rodriguez, Troublemaker Studios and the Mariachi trilogy and the whole thing. I feel like he did, started, Southern United States and Texas and the whole thing. And that's kind of where Tobe Hooper started. I feel like there's a lot of parallels, and I feel like this would make a good double feature.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Yeah.
All right, I'll blow your mind. I'm going to say this one might seem like low-hanging fruit, but Species.
That was going to be my pick, so I don't think it is low-hanging fruit. I think that's a very obvious choice. I think Species is a very obvious choice.
Well, that's what I mean. So that's the low-hanging fruit. Like, all right, Species is pretty close to this.
Yeah.
And then
it's got a girl walking around naked for most of the movie, so it's got that going on.
What about From Beyond? Like, I feel like From Beyond's got like a weird sexual...
It's got all the weird sex stuff in it, for sure.
Yeah. And then also, what was it? I just had it. Damn it, I just thought of something else. It was... Fuck, I forgot. Something else made me think. Oh, Ex Machina. Remember that movie? Like, dealing with the... Yeah, but like they have the weird stoic... odd female, and it's more about like how the men react, or that sort of thing. And I felt like this movie kind of digs into that a little bit, and so it's not really the same, but I feel like they're kind of tackling similar subject matter.
Sure.
Sci-fi with the horror element, the sexual thing. Yeah.
I mean, my main one, I would have said Species. I mean, that seems pretty obvious, but it's a very similar parallel with an alien woman who anyway. But if I had to go a different route, I'd say a Body Snatchers movie. Any of the Body Snatchers movies.
Yeah.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers, either the original Don Siegel movie or the remake, or the Abel Ferrara Body Snatchers, if you want to get really fucking weird. Right. Any of those movies kind of work because of the way that she takes over other people's consciousness. So that would be my other pick aside from Species.
I like
Nice,
it. I think
nice.
we made a solid list right there.
That's good. Those were good. I thought this one was going to be tough, but we did pretty good, guys.
Yeah.
I'm proud of us.
I feel like I got a
As a
glowing
whole.
air of like
As a
just
whole, on the whole.
achievement here.
On the whole.
So Life Force is Tobe Hooper's biggest film as far as like scope, budget. And it was a huge financial gambit by Canon Films that just didn't pay off. I mean, we mentioned earlier, $25 million, you know, just a couple years earlier, Star Trek II was 11 million. And this same year, the movie that opened up and beat Life Force at the box office, Ron Howard's Cocoon, $17 million. So that was a much more, I mean, that was a much more sure thing. That's a family friendly, you know, movie about nice old people, aliens. And, you know, it's
Right.
as opposed to a movie, you know, throwing $25 million at a movie called The Space Vampires. It's going to have a naked woman walking around for 30% of the movie.
Yeah, I think the only it's all naked seniors in a retirement home in Cocoon.
And it did ultimately hurt the careers of everyone involved. Matilda May reportedly does not even put this on her resume anymore. And it was one of several financial blunders that Canon made that would ultimately lead to their bankruptcy and closure by the end of the 1980s. But we're not there yet. We're still in 1985, and they're not dead yet. They're still chugging along, these guys at Canon Films. And Tobe Hooper still has 2 films in his contract for Canon. And so Life Force, you know, Life Force was kind of an homage of like the Quatermass stories and the British sci-fi that he had enjoyed as a kid. But his next film for Canon would be an even more blatant homage. It was, in fact, a remake of a science fiction film from the 1950s. It came out the very next year after Life Force, and that's the movie we're discussing on our next episode, which is 1986's Invaders from Mars.
Yeah, never seen that one either. So
yeah, so it should be fun. I mean,
Nice.
not it's probably the least known, I think, or the least. It's got the smallest cult following, maybe, of the 3 movies that we're talking about on this series, but it's definitely worth checking out because it is also kind of bonkers. So it should be fun.
Not the end of
That's our
Toby's
that's our stock and trade on Cinema Shock. Come on.
Bonkers movies.
Yeah.
It's not the end of Tobe Hooper, but at the end of Life Force, I will say I saw this later quote from Tobe Hooper where he said, in regards to Life Force, it was more like career murder, but I'm really proud of Life Force because no one will ever be brave enough to do a movie like that again. Even now, people watch that film with its massive budget and think, what the hell? But I knew that in time it'd be considered cool. Quentin Tarantino told me he went to see it many times when it first came out. It's one of his favorites, and I'm just kind of happy he understood how cool it was even back then.
Yeah, I love that quote because he's right. I mean, it has gained a big cult following, especially since it got released on, I mean, it had a nice success on VHS, but when it hit DVD in the early 2000s, that's when I first saw it. And I feel like that's when a lot of people were first able to discover this movie. And then great companies like Shout Factory putting out these big special editions of it have definitely helped as well. And it does show occasionally in 70 millimeter, you know, in places where that's possible. And I did alongside like 2001: A Space Odyssey, you know, you got Stanley Kubrick and then Tobe Hooper playing alongside side by side at these 70 millimeter film festivals. And I think that's sort of amazing.
That's
so
fun.
Talking about Invaders from Mars next week. If you guys want to watch it along with us, as we always encourage you to do, because as you may have noticed, we get into heavy spoilers on these episodes. So we always encourage you to watch the movies along with us. You can go to cinemashock.net. You can find links to where you can stream it online. I will say Invaders from Mars, you're going to probably have to stream it because the DVD or the Blu-ray from Shout Factory is out of print and very, very expensive on eBay.
These next 2 movies are.
Both of them. Yeah, but you can find them streaming pretty easily. So at least there's that. So we'll talk about that next week. Head to cinemashock.net. You can also find, of course, all of our episodes there. You can find links to buy our merch. I think Todd is currently winning in the contest to see whose stupid catchphrase t-shirt sells the most. I don't know. I have a feeling that he has family members buying them. My wife definitely bought one just to annoy me. And so if you could just buy one that says "Be excellent to each other," I think that would be great because it would help me. And it's also just a good sentiment, honestly, to tell people to be excellent to each other. So
or buy the one that actually makes a better t-shirt, which is "May the wings of liberty never lose a feather." So that's the one. That's the one to go with. But actually, be excellent to each other is not bad. But
that makes sense on a shirt. Like if you wear a shirt,
don't support Justin Bishop
is
is the real discussion here, I think.
If you have a shirt that says Johnny has the keys, nobody's going to know what that means. Much like the one that I'm wearing right now from one of my favorite t-shirt designers, Studio House Designs. It says Tom Atkins rules. I love the shirt because I love Tom Atkins. Nobody ever knows who it is. Nobody knows who Tom Atkins is.
But maybe they ask. So
that's true.
That's the only thing.
I also have a Tom Waits tattoo, and every time somebody asks me, "Who's that on your arm?" I'm like, "Oh, it's Tom Waits." And there's just this glazed look goes over their face because they have no idea who the fuck I'm talking about. So I'm like, it's fucking Leatherface. Just get over it.
Yeah.
Leatherface, get over it.
So Todd has the shirt that Justin's has the best like overall like standalone catchphrase. Todd has the one that will spark conversation with.
So Todd's is a conversation piece. Is that what we're saying?
Conversation piece. Mine looks like it's from a MAGA supporter. So,
just don't buy it in red.
Right. So it all works out.
Where can you guys be found on the internet for our listeners?
I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all the socials. And if you like Star Trek, you can seek out the Computer Resume podcast. It's the show where we cover the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order for fans new and old. And that is at Computer Resume on all the socials.
I am at This Is Gary Horn. I guess since Todd did it, I also have another podcast. It's about pro wrestling. If you like pro wrestling, it's This Is Pro Wrestling, and it's at TIPW Show. You can check it out on all those places. Side note, just a helpful hint. I know that we know people that listen to the show that check out the movies from a library. If you happen to get Texas Chainsaw Part 2 or Invaders from what's it called? Invaders from Beyond.
Invaders from Mars.
Invaders from Mars. I thought that, but then I thought that sounded weird. Invaders from Mars. Anyway, if you find them from your library, keep them. And whatever the cost is to replace them, I guarantee you can make it
it's
up.
Less
on
than
eBay.
what you'd spend on eBay or
Right.
Amazon.
The thoughts and opinions
Marketplace
of Gary
for
Horn
them.
do not necessarily reflect the thoughts and opinions.
Just
of
saying,
the
you can
Shop
turn
Podcast.
those things.
Oh man. Well, I'm at Justin_Bishop. You can find the show at Cinema_Shock on Twitter and Instagram. You can also find us on Facebook. Like, rate, review. Until next week.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
Johnny has the keys. Make it so.
It's carnage.